I was inspired to do this video after seeing a series of articles in a short period of time on rediscovered animals thought to have been extinct. The first two on this list are certainly strange. The Fernandina Giant Tortoise was, for some people, not extinct even though this was the headline of the article. However, this confusion could be due to the fact that this tortoise was not actually officially declared extinct. It was just believed to have been extinct. So whether this is a true Lazarus species is debatable. My name is Carmen, and I like to dive into the abyss of those what the F moments in life, be it phenomena or just plain weird behavior. Welcome to my channel. Firstly, what exactly is a Lazarus species? Well, in a nutshell, in paleontology, a Lazarus taxon, plural taxa, is a taxon that disappears for one or more periods from the fossil record, only to appear again later. Likewise, in conservation biology and ecology, it can refer to species or populations that were thought to be extinct and are rediscovered. The term refers to the story in the Christian biblical Gospel of John in which Christ raised Lazarus from the dead. I decided to dig a little bit deeper and try and find some more so-called Lazarus species, animals thought to have been extinct but then rediscovered, or, depending on your point of view, raised from the dead. This is just a few of them. There are many, many more. I will provide all the links below if any of you want to check them out in more detail. The world's largest bee may also be the planet's most elusive. First discovered in 1859 by the prominent scientist Alfred Russel Wallace. Nobody could locate it again, and it was presumed extinct. In 1981, an entomologist named Adam Messer searched and found it on 3 islands in Indonesia. He collected a specimen and wrote about his discovery in 1984. But now, for the first time, it has been photographed and filmed alive in the wild by a team including nature photographer Clay Bolt. Meanwhile, in the last year, 2 specimens of the insect have been sold on eBay for thousands of dollars, raising fears about its continued survival. The bee, which grows up to 1.5 inches long with a wingspan of 2.5 inches, has large mandibles that almost look like those of a stag beetle. It uses them to scrape sticky resin off trees to build burrows within termite nests where females raise their young. Like other bees, it feeds on nectar and pollen. Messer wrote in 1984 that it remains rare in its range and as this solitary bee lives only in aerial termite mounds, isn't exactly easy to find. It was collected in 1999 by a French researcher, though not filmed or photographed at that time. One of the most notable things about the bee was the sound of her wings, a deep, slow thrum that you could almost feel as well as hear, Bolt says. The Fernandina Giant Tortoise was last confirmed alive in 1906. This female is estimated to be 100 years old. With giant tortoises living up to 200 years, there's hope she can help her species recover. Though not officially declared extinct, these giant tortoises on the island of Fernandina had been feared by many to have been lost to the ages. The last sighting of a lone male tortoise was in 1906. In the decades since then, there had been signs of the species' continued survival on the island. The occasional discovery of tortoise droppings and bite marks provided some reassurance, but any tortoises themselves remained out of sight. That is, until recently. It was announced that researchers on an Animal Planet-funded expedition had located a female giant tortoise on Fernandina. One might argue that these are just animals that are so rare that we assume they are extinct, and then one day someone notices one purely by chance. I also understand that some animals are really very good at hiding, and we cannot see all of them. In this video, there are examples of animals that had vanished for many, many years, in some cases for hundreds of years, and suddenly they reappeared. As another article also pointed out, these giants were rediscovered within weeks of each other. What were the chances of that happening? A large stick insect from a remote Australian island is back from the dead. It's hard to miss a Lord Howe Island stick insect, sometimes called a tree lobster. Their blackish-brown bodies grow to be nearly 6 inches long, and the robust insect has a sturdy abdomen and 6 long legs. For decades, it appeared to be extinct, but new DNA research reveals that may not be the case. To understand the insect's complicated and sudden revival, you have to go back to a small island as it was 100 years ago. The massive population decline of these stick insects began with a shipwreck in 1918 on their namesake Lord Howe Island, a small, lush landmass jutting out of the ocean off the east coast of Australia. In addition to its crew, the ship contained a horde of rats that quickly invaded the island. With no larger mammals to hunt and kill the rats, their population exploded. The stick insect was eventually classified as extinct in 1983, along with 12 other insect species and 5 bird species. In 1960, a group of rock climbers visited another small volcanic rock island nearby named Ball's Pyramid. It was there that they found what appeared to be the dead remains of the extinct stick creatures. It wasn't until 2001 that researchers returned to Ball's Pyramid. Atop a tea tree, 213 feet above sea level, sat a few living examples of what appeared to be Lord Howe island stick insects. In the year that followed, several of the insects were collected and placed in a captive breeding program at Melbourne Zoo. However, for nearly a decade, the identity of the insects was the subject of debate. Visually, the captive-bred stick insects looked different. They had darker brown bodies, and their back legs were thinner than the museum specimens. It wasn't until genome sequencing was conducted on both the museum specimens and the captive-bred stick insects that scientists realized they had a less than 1% genetic variance, enough to officially classify them as the same species. These findings were recently published in the journal Current Biology. The subtle physical differences are still a mystery. Researchers think it may have to do with variances in environmental conditions or in an individual insect's age. During recent monitoring, scientists from the Wild Deserts Conservation Group spotted the first crest-tailed mulgara in Tibu-Burra's Sturt National Park in more than 100 years. The small, carnivorous marsupial is a guinea pig-size relative of the Tasmanian devil, says ecologist Rebecca West, who was involved with the find. The mammal weighs less than 5.5 ounces and sports a coat of pale blonde fur. Its thick tail, measuring a little less than half its body length, is tipped with a distinctive black crest that gives the animal its name. West adds, the ferocious little micro-predator eats small mammals, reptiles, and insects. After finding the mulgara, which was an immature female, they measured it and released it back into the desert in the hopes that it would find a mate and reproduce. The researchers recognized the mammal because they had worked with this species in other parts of Australia before. First discovered only a decade ago, scouting for dolphins near Madagascar a few years ago, Salvatore Curcio, a National Geographic explorer, stumbled onto Omura's whales. With their striking dark light patterns and super streamlined profile, Omura's whales are a combination of grace and beauty, says Curcio. They are stunning animals. Curcio's team made 44 sightings of the whales off Madagascar during 2013 and 2014, and more than 80 sightings in 2015. Curcio's team, which observed the whales swallowing murky water as recently as late 2015, suspects the whales are filtering out food such as fish eggs or tiny plankton that are almost invisible to the human eye. The new observations also showed the Omura's social habits are distinctive. It doesn't form tight-knit pods like many other whale species, but it isn't solitary either. Instead, the Omuras was seen hanging out in loose groups of up to a half a dozen animals. Animals stay within hearing range of each other, but give each other plenty of personal space. The whales sing a low, repetitive melody that they may repeat for an hour or more. Occasionally, multiple whales raise their voices in an Omura's chorus. This species, Balaenoptera omuri, which resembles a small fin whale, was only named in 2003 and purely from dead specimens. There were also no confirmed sightings of the species, which measures around 10 meters in length, afterwards, suggesting it had already gone extinct. However, it was later confirmed via DNA that the population of small whales discovered off the coast of Madagascar were indeed the Omura's whale. You may forgive scientists for not being able to keep track of species that move around, but surely sedentary species such as plants are easier to study. Mount Diablo buckwheat, Eriogonum truncatumis, found only on Mount Diablo, California, was discovered in 1862. However, despite the area being studied in depth, only 7 specimens were recorded, the last of which was found in 1936. Consequently, this species, which has a small pink flower, was declared extinct, presumed outcompeted by introduced species, until it was found accidentally in 2005 by a researcher working on the edge of its recorded range. Hundreds of thousands of seeds have now been propagated, ensuring that the species won't become extinct again, at least not in our lifetimes. Unfortunately, this one is shrouded in controversy and doubt. John Young, the man who rediscovered the night parrot in 2013, is currently under scrutiny, as is some of his evidence. In a blog post, he defends his findings and allegations that he illegally captured the bird in order to obtain clear images of it. Young was forced to resign from the Australian Wildlife Conservancy. Other evidence in question is regarding Young's claim that the night parrots have established a new population in southern Australia. As ABC's website quotes, proof of a new night parrot population in South Australia is in doubt, as the Australian Wildlife Conservancy has removed all information about the rare bird from its website until an investigation is completed. Young claims to have found feathers and a nest, proving that the night parrot is once again alive and thriving in southern Australia. However, the feathers sent in for analysis seem to differ from those on the images photographed by Young, and some say that the eggs clearly look fake. So the question still remains if Young decided to embellish or not. What appears to be genuine, though, is the fact that he photographed the bird. The only thing that is in question here is how. No, this is not a Harry Potter spell. The Raphium pectinatum is a species of fly thought to be extinct. It was only seen once in July 1868, but was spotted by naturalist Bob Walton at the Devon Wildlife Trust Nature Reserve in the UK in 2015. Little is known about the metallic green-coloured fly, apart from the fact that it is part of the family known colloquially as long-legged flies. Most members of the family live in tropical areas of the world. Nothing is known about its biology, but it seems that it may like brackish conditions, like those found at the old sludge beds, and may even be associated with the extensive tidal reed beds nearby at the head of the Exe estuary, Walton said. Finding the fly here demonstrates the importance of the work the Devon Wildlife Trust does looking after these unusual and special habitats. Walton conceded that flies are not the most popular animals among the general public. To most people, the only good fly is a dead one. But only a tiny proportion of the flies in Britain are pests, while many are important for pollination and for ensuring efficient recycling of the nutrients in dead plant material. And they are an important part of the food web. Many of our birds rely on them. Without flies, there would be no swallows, and not many bats, nor, incidentally, would we have any chocolate. The cacao tree is pollinated by midges, a kind of fly. This primate had not been seen since the 1970s, so many experts assumed it was extinct. The species was photographed in 2015 in the newest wildlife reserve in the Republic of Congo, the Notoku-Pikunda National Park. The Bouvier's red colobus monkey was discovered in the years 1883 to 1886 and described in 1887 by a French botanist and zoologist. The monkey belongs to the subgenus Peleocolobus of the genus Procolobus, colobus monkeys. It has been considered a subspecies of a larger colobus taxonomic group in the past, but the most recent treatment lists it as a full species. The species is thought to occur in the Republic of Congo, in the swamp forests between the lower Likwala and Sangha rivers, as well as along the Alima River farther to the south. It does not show fear of humans, making it an easy target for bushmeat hunters. The last unverified sightings of the monkey occurred in the 1970s. Then, in February 2015, independent primatologists stumbled upon a group of Bouvier's red colobus in the swamp forests along the Bokiba River in the Notoku-Pikunda National Park. They also managed to snap the first ever photographs of the elusive monkey. Our photos are the world's first and confirm that the species is not extinct, De Vries said. Bouvier's red colobus has brownish red fur on its body that is lighter than its closest relative, the Pennant's colobus. Its head has a patch of black to chocolate brown fur. It has a white chin and whiskers. A black band of fur extends from above the eyes to the temples. The monkey's eyes are surrounded by large pink eye rings. The tail is long in proportion to its small body and is dark brown at the root, fading to brownish red at the tip. The fur on the species' underside is lighter than the fur on its back. Bouvier's red colobus is thought to exhibit considerable facial variation from individual to individual, varying from light flesh-coloured with blackish cheeks and brows to darker tones throughout the face, excluding the nose and lips. Sometimes the best defense is a great disguise. The oriental blue clearwing is a Malaysian moth that resembles a few of the bees and wasps in its native area. To pass itself off as a stinging insect, the creature evolved a bee-like colour pattern. It also makes an ominous buzzing noise while flying. The species first came to scientific light in 1887, when a dead specimen was collected and shipped off to the Natural History Museum in Vienna. For 130 years, no other specimens, living or deceased, were reported. As such, scientists had no way of knowing if the Oriental blue clearwing had succumbed to extinction. But now the mystery has been put to rest. Marta Skowron-Vilopony is a Polish entomologist at the University of Gdansk. Between 2013 and 2017, she and her husband, Paolo, photographed a handful of live Oriental blue clearwings in southern Malaysia. After a DNA test confirmed that they had indeed rediscovered this long-lost species, the Viloponys announced their big find to the world in a paper published on November the 24th, 2017. During a 1975 expedition into the forests of Guatemala, herpetologists Paul Elias and Jeremy Jackson discovered 3 then unknown salamander species. One of these, the Jackson's climbing salamander, was a vibrant yellow creature whose appearance earned it the nickname Golden Wonder. Yet, eye-catching as it is, the animal has proven quite elusive. In fact, after Jackson and Elias identified the critter in '75, nobody would see one again for another 42 years. The situation looked especially hopeless in 2014 when Jackson and Elias themselves went on a follow-up trip through the same area. Though they carefully retraced the steps they'd taken decades earlier, not a single golden wonder was spotted this time. Then along came a park ranger on a lunch break. In 2015, he noticed an attractive yellow salamander. He photographed it and sent the pictures off for identification. Sure enough, it was a Jackson's climbing salamander. For the record, that's pronounced Tachira antpitta. It's a little brown songbird named after a state in Venezuela. In 1955 and 1956, ornithologists discovered this species near the country's Colombian border, and that's the last anyone saw of it for a long while. Because no other sightings or encounters were announced over the following 6 decades, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, labelled the Tachira antpitta critically endangered. This year, though, we learned about a 2016 expedition which verified that the species has not perished. The trip in question was orchestrated by an international conservation partnership called the Red Siskin Initiative. Led by biologist Jonathan Miranda, the team set out to find living specimens of near-extinct birds in western Venezuela. On the first full day of their trip, the team hit the jackpot when they became the first people to identify a Tachira antpitta's distinctive cry since 1956. Later on, the explorers managed to photograph one of the birds. Altogether, they spotted 2 individuals and heard a total of 4. A lot of controversy surrounds this animal. Scientists can't reach a consensus on how the New Guinea Highland wild dog should be classified. Some say it's a valid canine species. Others regard it as merely a dingo subspecies. And still others write off the creature as a primitive domestic dog breed. In any event, the pooch is world famous for its weird, high-pitched howl. The first Western scientist to learn of its existence was English zoologist Charles Walter de Vries, who came across one on Mount Scratchley in Papua New Guinea back in 1897. A handful of these dogs were exported in the 1950s, and today captive bred specimens can be found in zoos from Neumünster, Germany to Kansas City, Missouri. But what happened to their wild counterparts? One free-roaming individual was photographed on New Guinea's Star Mountains in 1989. However, no other verified encounters with these dogs in their natural habitat were made until September 2016, when researchers used camera traps to snag 140 photographs of a wild group of at least 15 canines. The participating adventurers also documented paw prints and gathered fecal material. News of their findings was broken in a March 24, 2017 press release from the New Guinea Highland Wild Dog Foundation, a non-profit activist group. Possibly the most famous Lazarus species, the coelacanth is a fish that has an interesting history due to the fact that it was thought to have died out 65 million years ago, but was found to still exist in the 1930s. Its rediscovery was seen as one of the most important zoological findings of the 20th century. It was thought to have gone extinct at the same time as the dinosaurs. But in 1938, one was discovered off the coast of South Africa. Coelacanths are closely related to lungfish and are thought to be an evolutionary transitional species between fish and tetrapods. The fish tend to shelter in deep water caves, largely out of sight. But it is estimated that there could be only 500 or so left alive. The coelacanth is a lobe-finned fish and appear to have developed into their current form around 350 to 400 million years ago and have not changed or adapted since, meaning they are now often referred to as a living fossil. When the Natural History Museum was opened in London in 1881, its walls were decorated with carvings of animals with extinct species on the east and living species on the west. The carving of the coelacanth was placed on the east wall because the scientific community believed it had been extinct for 65 to 70 million years. The only evidence of its existence was through fossil records. The coelacanth was rediscovered in the late 1930s by Marjorie Courtney Latimer, a 32-year-old museum employee from the small South African town of East London. Being a self-taught expert in natural history and animal life, she would often be called upon to identify strange and unusual species which were caught by local fishermen. On the 23rd of December 1938, a local trawler captain named Hendrik Goosen caught a haul of various fish while fishing just outside the mouth of the Chalumna River. Out of curiosity, Courtney Latimer looked through his catch and found a fish she described as, quote, "the most beautiful fish I had ever seen." It was 5 foot long, a pale, mauvey blue with faint flecks of whitish spots. It was covered in hard scales, and it had 4 limb-like fins and a strange little puppy dog tail, unquote. However, Courtney Latimer was unable to identify the fish and so took it away for further examination, hoping to work out what it was with the help of textbooks and academic journals. Courtney Latimer was unable to work out what species the fish was and eventually came to the only conclusion she could. The fish in front of her was a coelacanth, meaning this species was not in fact extinct, but was still living in South African waters. Courtney Latimer contacted Professor James Leonard Brearley Smith, a university lecturer who was an expert in fish and marine life. After a delay, he responded with a now famous telegram. Most important, preserve skeleton and gills. Fish described. When Professor Smith arrived, he was able to confirm that the preserved fish was indeed a coelacanth, and one of the most important zoological discoveries of the 20th century had been made. The discovery of the fish led to fame and plaudits throughout the scientific community for both Marjorie Courtney Latimer and Professor Smith. However, it would be a long time until another coelacanth would be caught. Efforts continued for many years to catch a second specimen, and even with the offer of £100 reward, no further coelacanths were ever captured. Eventually, 2 local Comoros Islands fishermen caught one when fishing for other species in 1952. Further coelacanths were caught throughout the 1960s and 1970s. And in 2000, scientists used an underwater ROV, remote operate vehicle, to gain the first ever footage of coelacanths in their natural environment at depths of 125 meters off the coast of South Africa. The rediscovery of the coelacanth led to further investigation into this species, but there is still relatively little known about many aspects of its life. Only 33 individual coelacanths have been identified by scientists. There is now understood to be 2 separate species of coelacanth: the Indonesian coelacanth and the West Indian Ocean coelacanth. Both species can grow to 6 feet in length and weigh over 200 pounds. They have 2 dorsal fins, a broad tail fin, and their body is covered in heavy armoured scales. Coelacanth usually live at depths of around 500 to 1,000 meters, but have been observed in shallower waters on rare occasions. The kahau, also known as the Bermuda petrel, is a bird that is rarely seen even today. When Spanish sailors in the 1500s used Bermuda's islands as stopping points between their attacks on the Incas, they often relied on ever-plentiful petrel for food. Later, with colonization and the destruction of their natural habitat, the birds soon died out and were declared to be extinct by the early 1600s. The story could have just stopped there, but a whopping 300 years later, zoologist William Beebe was given an injured seabird, which he identified as being a Bermuda petrel. A few years later, he took in another bird of the same kind before releasing it for rehabilitation. Nowadays, David Wingate watches over the still small colony of birds where they nest on Castle Harbour. If you've seen one little brown bird, you've seen them all, right? Many people wouldn't be able to pick out the Myanmar Jerdon's babbler from any other small brown bird, and it might be this very thing that has allowed it to go undetected for 70 years. The last time the bird was sighted was in 1941 in the grasslands around Myit Kiana, Myanmar. Before long, bird books were saying that the animal was extinct, and it continued to slip into obscurity thanks to development and agriculture wiping clear their grassland habitat. Then, in 2013, a group of researchers essentially stumbled across a small population of the birds. They went out to the grassland habitat where they had originally been seen and heard a strange call. They recorded the call, played it back at high volume, and sure enough, these little brown birds, missing for decades, popped by to see what all the noise was about. It seems that despite losing most of their home, they're still surviving in the little pockets that remain, and now scientists will be working with the locals to ensure the safety of what's left of them. Sometimes research into one question reveals the answer to another. In July 2012, Catherine Hughes and Julie Broken-Brow, students at the University of Queensland in Australia, were in Papua New Guinea studying how the region's tiny microbats responded to sustainable logging of their forest homes. As part of the project, the scientists trapped and caught 41 bats from 9 known species, as well as a female bat they could not immediately identify. The specimen was brought back to the Papua New Guinea National Museum and Art Gallery, where it sat for nearly 2 years. I hope someone fed it. Then, Australian museum researcher Harry Parnaby requested the bat for study and received it on loan. He looked it over, dug through the scientific record, and established the unknown bat's identity. It was a New Guinea big-eared bat, a species that had only been observed once before, way back in 1890, over 120 years ago. The bat is currently listed as critically endangered, possibly extinct, by the IUCN, and appears as number 32 on the Zoological Society of London's evolutionarily distinct and globally endangered list, or EDGE, which maps some of the world's rarest species. It is also the only known member of its genus. Of course, conclusively identifying a species that hasn't been seen in 124 years is no easy task, especially when, as in this case, The only previously known sample used to describe it has long since disappeared. As recounted in the May 28th issue of Records of the Australian Museum, Parnaby was able to distinguish the rediscovered bat from other species by the curve of its nose, the size and lobes of its ears, and the naked skin above its nostrils. Other than these relatively minor physical attributes, the Pharotis bat looks quite similar to another local species, the small-toothed long-eared bat. In fact, a specimen from this species was found in 1985 and initially misidentified as the big-eared bat until it was re-examined 3 years later. Now that the New Guinea big-eared bat has been rediscovered, the authors note that much remains to be learned about it. Part of Hughes and Brokenbrow's original work involved recording the echolocation calls of Papua New Guinea's bats. We still don't know what the big-eared bats sound like, nor do we know anything about their ecology. What are their habitat requirements? What do they eat? How and where do they nest? How many of these rare bats remain? The authors wrote that detailed surveys are needed to critically determine whether this species requires the proximity of both rainforest and more open habitats, which would help to determine regional forestry practices. They also note that earlier surveys of protected areas have never turned up any sign of this species. The bat was found in an unprotected area, so its habitats may be at risk. They recommend new surveys to establish the bat's distribution and abundance, additional acoustic studies to see if its echolocation calls can be identified, and, if anyone gets that far, radio surveys to define their habitat and roosting requirements at various stages of their reproductive cycle. Much of lowland Papua New Guinea's rainforests are being cut down for timber or to make way for development or agriculture. That practice could place additional pressures on the big-eared bats as well as other microbats in the region. In other words, we may not have another 120 years to save this rediscovered species. The Wondiwoi tree kangaroo is so rare and elusive that it disappeared for nearly a century and was assumed to be extinct. Now it has not only been spotted, but also photographed for the first time ever. The unusual monkey-like kangaroo clambers through the trees of the montane forests of New Guinea. It had been seen there only once before by Western scientists in 1928. The Wondiwoi tree kangaroo had not been collected, seen, or reported since that first sighting. It is one of the most poorly known mammals in the world, says Mark Eldridge, a marsupial biologist at the Australian Museum in Sydney. Tree kangaroos are tropical marsupials that are close relatives of ground-dwelling kangaroos and wallabies. These medium-sized kangaroos have muscular forearms to pull themselves up the trunks of trees and move around the branches using an odd mix of climbing and hopping. Despite being little known to the world at large, they are a surprisingly diverse group. There are 17 species and subspecies, 2 in the far north of Australia and the remainder on the huge island of New Guinea. Michael Smith, 47, an amateur botanist from Farnham, England, led the expedition to find the rare species. He hatched the expedition plan after hearing about the mysterious animal while scouring West Papuan mountains for rhododendrons in 2017. With the aid of 4 Papuan porters, a local hunter acting as a guide, and Norman Terrock, a student at the University of Papua in Manokwari, who is a fellow natural history enthusiast, Smith trekked into the jungle on July 23rd, emerging a week later with news of the find. He reached out to the world experts on tree kangaroos, including Eldridge and Roger Martin of James Cook University in Queensland, Australia, to confirm the find before going public. The Wondiwoi tree kangaroo was first spotted by legendary evolutionary biologist Ernst Mayr in 1928. Mayr spotted it in the mountains of the Wondiwoi Peninsula, which is in the Indonesian state of West Papua on the western half of the huge island of New Guinea. Mayr shot what became the only specimen known to science and sent its pelt to the Natural History Museum in London. It was described as a species, Dendrolagus mayeri, in 1933. Since then, locals have rarely reported even hints that the species still existed. But this may be because the hunters only ever go up to about 1,300 meters, when the forest starts getting really dense with bamboo thickets, explained Smith. To get above that level, his crew had to cut a path through. Once they ascended to about 1,500 to 1,700 meters, they began to see characteristic scratch marks on trunks left by tree kangaroos and occasional dung. We could also smell the scent marks left by the kangaroos, a sort of foxy smell, he adds. Despite weighing up to 35 pounds, tree kangaroos are remarkably cryptic, often remaining totally hidden high in the forest canopy. On one of the final days of their expedition, having had no luck spotting one, the crew started to head down. That was when the hunter spotted a kangaroo 30 meters up, Smith says. After a lot of scrambling around, trying to get my lens to focus on the animal peeking out from behind the leaves, I got a few half-decent shots. Tim Flannery of the University of Melbourne in Australia, who described 4 of the New Guinea tree kangaroos in the 1990s and authored Tree Kangaroos, A Curious Natural History, describes the find as a great breakthrough. The images are clear and reveal the distinctive coat colour, he says. Leaving little doubt, the animal is a Wondiwoi tree kangaroo. Adding to the credibility of the find, the Wondiwoi mountains are also hundreds of miles away from suitable high-altitude habitat for related kangaroos. The Wondiwoi tree kangaroo has a very limited distribution, perhaps just 40 to 80 square miles, but the numerous scratch marks and dung suggest it is amazingly common in a very small area, Flannery adds. The reason they remained unknown for so long is probably due to that bloody bamboo forest, adds Martin. Only an intrepid Pom, or Brit, in pursuit of rhododendrons would have persevered. He says the priority now will be for scientists to return to collect dung or a small piece of ear tissue, to extract DNA and compare with DNA from the pelt collected in 1928. Knowing the animal still exists provides a great opportunity to gather more information, since we know virtually nothing about it, as well as to ensure its survival, agrees Eldridge. Smith hopes the find will lead to greater protection for a national park that encompasses the Wondiwoi Mountains. There is already a proposal for a gold mine in the park that would pose a threat to the area's unique wildlife. The black-naped pheasant pigeon was seen for the first and last time in 1882, according to a news release from non-profit Rewild, which helped fund the search effort. Rediscovering the bird required an expedition team to spend a grueling month on Ferguson, a rugged island in the D'Entrecasteaux archipelago off eastern Papua New Guinea, where the bird was originally documented. The team consisted of local staff at the Papua New Guinea National Museum, as well as international scientists from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and the American Bird Conservancy. Ferguson Island is covered in rugged mountainous terrain, making the expedition especially challenging for the scientists. Many members of the community told the team that they hadn't seen the black-naped pheasant pigeon in decades. But just 2 days before the researchers were scheduled to leave the island, a camera trap captured footage of the exceptionally rare bird. After a month of searching, seeing those first photos of the pheasant pigeon felt like finding a unicorn. John C. Mittermeier, director of the Lost Birds program at American Bird Conservancy and co-leader of the expedition, said in the release, "It is the kind of moment you dream about your entire life as a conservationist and bird watcher." The black-naped pheasant pigeon is a large ground-dwelling pigeon with a broad tail, according to the release. Scientists still know little about the species and believe the population is small and decreasing. Insight from local residents was crucial for the scientists to track down the elusive bird. It wasn't until we reached villages on the western slope of Mount Kilkerran that we started meeting hunters who had seen and heard the pheasant pigeon. Jason Gregg, a conservation biologist and co-leader of the expedition team, said in the release, "We became more confident about the local name of the bird, which is Auwo, and felt like we were getting closer to the core habitat of where the black-naped pheasant pigeon lives." They placed a total of 12 camera traps on the slopes of Mount Kilkerran, which is the island's highest mountain. And they placed another 8 cameras in locations where local hunters reported seeing the bird in the past. A hunter named Augustin Gregory, based in the mountain village Duda Ununa, provided the final breakthrough that helped scientists locate the pheasant pigeon. Gregory told the team that he had seen the black-naped pheasant pigeon in an area with steep ridges and valleys, and he had heard the bird's distinctive calls. So the expedition team placed a camera on a 3,200-foot high ridge near the Kwama River above Duda Ununa, and finally, just as their trip was ending, they captured footage of the bird walking on the forest floor. The discovery was a shock for the scientists and the local community alike. The communities were very excited when they saw the survey results because many people hadn't seen or heard of the bird until we began our project and got the camera trap photos, said Serena Ketaloya, a conservationist from Milne Bay, Papua New Guinea. They're now looking forward to working with us to try to protect the pheasant pigeon. It's still not clear just how many of the pheasant pigeons are left. and the rugged terrain will make identifying the population difficult. A 2-week survey in 2019 failed to find any proof of the bird, although it did discover some reports from hunters that helped determine the locations for the 2022 expedition. And the discovery might provide hope that other bird species thought extinct are still out there somewhere. This rediscovery is an incredible beacon of hope for other birds that have been lost for half a century or more, said Christina Biggs, the manager for the Search for Lost Species at Rewild. The terrain the team searched was incredibly difficult, but their determination never wavered, even though so few people could remember seeing the pheasant pigeon in recent decades. Jürgen Vega, a birdwatching scientist in Colombia, was working in July when he spotted a striking bright blue and emerald green hummingbird flitting about in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta Mountains. He realized the colorful male bird was a Santa Marta saberwing. The species was only documented twice before. It was first collected more than 75 years ago and then not seen again until 2010. This sighting was a complete surprise, but a very welcome one, Vega said. As I was leaving the area where I had been working, a hummingbird caught my attention. I got out my binoculars and was shocked to see that it was a Santa Marta saberwing, and in an incredible stroke of luck, the hummingbird perched on a branch, giving me time to take photos and video. We were looking for other bird species that are also endemic to the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. The flashy bird was easy to recognize. It was large with emerald green and iridescent blue feathers and a curved black bill. The male of the species has been recorded at about 5 inches. By contrast, the ruby-throated hummingbird is 2.8 to 3.5 inches. Although the newly rediscovered bird was easy to identify, researchers aren't well informed about the bird. This is a species of which we do not know much about, Botero Delgadillo says. It was first described during the 18th century, and the first confirmed record came from 1946, when the first specimens were collected. After almost 6 decades, the saberwing was photographed again when it was incidentally captured in a bird banding station. Then it took us 12 years to record it again. When Vega spotted the hummingbird, it was perched on a branch and singing. Researchers believe that birds do this as a means of courtship and defending their territory. But Vega says he didn't see any other hummingbirds in the area. There have been occasional reports of possible sightings of Santa Marta saberwings over the past decade or so by local birdwatchers. The species is listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, with population numbers decreasing. Endemic to the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta Mountains, the birds were described as fairly common at the beginning of the 20th century, according to the IUCN. The area is particularly rich in biodiversity and is home to at least 24 species of birds that are found nowhere else on Earth. It is considered the most irreplaceable ecosystem on Earth, given the presence of perhaps hundreds of unique plants and animals that do not occur anywhere else. It is a coastal mountain range, the highest coastal mountain on the planet, that has remained relatively isolated for a very prolonged period, which has given rise to an unprecedented number of exclusive species. It is the most important continental area of endemism worldwide. Researchers say this rediscovery is important for many reasons. This finding demonstrates once and again that we still know very little about many highly threatened species that could disappear any time without us noticing it. For these species, urgent actions are important, but in order to direct those actions, we need to know more about the targeted species. How can we design effective conservation strategies if we do not understand what exactly needs to be done? Nothomyomycia, also known as the dinosaur ant or dawn ant, is an extremely rare genus of ant consisting of a single species, Nothomyomycia macrops. These ants live in South Australia, nesting in old-growth mallee woodland and eucalyptus woodland. The full distribution of Nothomyomycia has never been assessed, and it is unknown how widespread the species truly is. Its potential range may be wider if it does favour old-growth mallee woodland. Possible threats to its survival include habitat destruction and climate change. The dinosaur ant is most active when it is cold because workers encounter fewer competitors and predators, and it also increases hunting success. Thus, the increase of temperature may prevent them from foraging, and very few areas would be suitable for the ant to live in. As a result, the IUCN lists the ant as critically endangered. The ant was first described by Australian entomologist John S. Clarke in 1934 from 2 specimens of worker ants. These were reportedly collected in 1931 near the Russell Range, inland from Israelite Bay in Western Australia. After its initial discovery, the ant was not seen again for 4 decades, until a group of entomologists rediscovered it in 1977, 1,300 kilometers away from the original reported site. Dubbed as the Holy Grail of myrmecology, the ant was subject to great scientific interest after its rediscovery, attracting scientists from around the world. In Puchera, the rediscovery site, pictures of the ant are stenciled on the streets, and it is perhaps the only town in the world that thrives off ant-based tourism. In the mid-19th century, German naturalist and explorer Ludwig Leichhardt found the species in 1845 near Deaf Adder Creek, which runs off the South Alligator River on the Northern Territory's Arnhem Land Plateau. Describing its bright brick colour dotted with blue, Leichhardt reported finding the grasshopper here in great numbers. But between this sighting and the early 1900s, only 2 more specimens were discovered, each many years apart. And then, just like its namesake, the species disappeared without a trace. At the age of 35, Leichhardt disappeared somewhere in the Great Sandy Desert. 70 years passed before Leichhardt's grasshopper was officially rediscovered in 1971 by principal research scientist of CSIRO's Division of Wildlife Research, J.H. Calaby. Calabi had returned to South Alligator River, now protected within Kakadu National Park, to spot a single male nymph on a sandstone pediment. While Calabi's find meant that the species was not extinct after all, it remains particularly rare and little studied, with just a few fragile populations sustained by 3 native species of flowering shrub within the Kakadu and Keep River National Parks. Bright colouring in insects usually signifies some level of toxicity, as does this species' tendency to spew a brownish liquid when agitated. But chemical analysis has turned up little evidence that these grasshoppers are harbouring any toxic compounds. And weirdly enough, the species has no known vertebrate predators, which suggests that rather than being toxic, the brownish spew's purpose is simply to taste awful. Classic spew. In 1996, chemists William Kitching and Mary Fletcher from the University of Queensland analysed the species' host plants to find certain compounds that are associated with bitter-tasting glycoside sugar groups. So they suggested that by feeding on these plants exclusively, the species cements its reputation as a terrible meal. An unexpected psycho cricket. No, I'm just kidding. But with a name like that, I mean, come on. A dune-inhabiting cricket from Turkey, known from a single specimen seen in 1901 and presumed extinct until it was found again in 2005. Professor Gürkan Aydin from the Isparta University of Applied Sciences said he had proved approximately 20 years ago that the cricket, also known as Schizodactylus inexpectatus, was not extinct and that it self-breeds and consumes members of its own species. Aydin, who is also head of the Plant and Animal Production Department of Atabi Vocational School in Isparta, stated that the cricket was discovered in Turkey at the end of the 1800s, and during that time, the number of these carnivorous grasshoppers was found to be decreasing according to studies conducted by foreign scientists. He said they found the cricket, which was believed to be extinct because it had not been seen for a century, about 20 years ago in the Çukurova and Göksu deltas located in Turkey's southern provinces of Adana and Mersin, respectively. A number of scientists from Germany, Czechia, Italy and Poland had arrived in Turkey to study the insect's habitat after finding out that it exists again, said Aydin. Noting that the insect was named the dune cricket because it is a key species in desert ecosystems and lives in the sand, Aydin said that he prepared scientific publications after researching the distribution of the cricket, its biological features, the effects of humans on the species, and the effects of the cricket species on other living beings. The dune cricket can be seen in the coastal areas close to the Mediterranean, but so far only in Turkey, according to Aydin, who has been observing the insects for the past 20 years. However, the population of the rare species is decreasing by 90% due to environmental pressures. This cricket, which hides in the sand during the day and does not go out for hunting, lives actively at night, feeds not only on grass but on harmful insects, and is also a cannibal. In other words, because it is a cannibal, it can eat other members of the same species. Aidan told Anadolu Agency. Another interesting feature of the insect is that it self-breeds, said Aidan, while noting that it is a very delicate species. It is an endemic species in Turkey. During our studies, we determined the characteristics of this cricket, and nearly 10 articles were published in international journals. We are telling the world about the scientific features of this species. In my last study, I am investigating the positive effect of this locust species on the reproduction of sea turtles. He added that Turkey is a uniquely rich region for endemic species. One article bears the headline of "Horror Fly Returns from the Dead." A mythical beast not seen for more than 160 years. A nocturnal animal that feeds on the rotten flesh of large mammals. A species active only during the winter months that reportedly emits a luminous glow from its large orange head. What new horror is this? It's a fly, the bone skipper, and it is back from the dead. Considered globally extinct until now, the first fly to be killed off by humans. The bone skipper was first described by an entomologist who found it on the carcass of a dog in 1798. Last seen in the 1840s, it has now been rediscovered by Daniel Martin Vega and colleagues of the University of Alcalá in Madrid, Spain. The fly turned up in baited traps in woodland around Madrid and in La Rioja province. As might be expected of a species described as mythical, even by entomologists, and that until recently hadn't been seen in living memory, little is known of its feeding ecology or its behaviour. But we can make some educated guesses. The bone skipper is sarcosaprophagus. That is, it specialises in eating and breeding in marrow from crushed bones of large mammals such as deer. In the past, such carcasses would have been relatively common in European forests after kills by bears and wolves, but these days are scarce. The decline in large predators coincided with the ecological effects of the Industrial Revolution. On farms across Europe, livestock were better managed and carcasses disposed of in ways that left fewer bones for bone skippers. It is one of the dangers of over-specialization that when the thing you rely on disappears, you yourself are imperiled. Lessons for us all here. Whether the newly discovered specimen have found something else to feed on and breed in is unknown, as the larvae have not been observed. It would be surprising, however, if they didn't show the leaping behaviour characteristic of this family of flies. Bone skipper larvae curl and rapidly uncurl their bodies, thus skipping over their rotten flesh meal and earning their common name. Larvae of a related fly, the cheese skipper, are only 8 millimeters long but can leap 15 centimeters into the air. These are the maggots, incidentally, that are intentionally added to pecorino in Sardinia, Italy, producing casamazu, rotten cheese. Martin Vega and colleagues were studying the colonization of carrion as part of a forensic entomology study. These flies are valuable to police in aging corpses and time of death, as they do not colonize bodies until 3 to 6 months after death. Martin Vega speculates that one of the reasons they have evaded entomologists for so long is because collections are not usually made in winter when the flies are more active. Nor are most entomologists inclined to collect insects from highly decayed corpses. The Pitt Island longhorn beetle is a species of beetle endemic to the Chatham Islands. Once thought to be extinct, it is now known to survive on Southeast Island Ragatira, being therefore an example of a so-called Lazarus taxon. It was first described and named by Francis Polkinghorne Pascoe in 1875, based on male and female specimens collected by Henry H. Travers on Pitt Island. A type specimen is held at the Natural History Museum, London. The last known collection of this beetle prior to its rediscovery was by Thomas Hall, who extensively sampled Pitt Island for beetles between 1906 and 1908. He collected 3 specimens, which are now held in the New Zealand Arthropod collection. Identification of the Pitt Island longhorn is difficult, as it is very similar in appearance to another longhorn beetle found in the Chatham Islands. Both species are coloured black with a green-bronze sheen. However, it is likely that the Pitt Island longhorn has more of a bronze sheen than the other beetle. Of the 2 species, the Pitt Island longhorn also has the more pronounced ridges on its wing cases. Generally, the Pitt Island longhorn is the larger beetle of the 2, but the size of the 2 species can overlap. However, if a longhorn beetle specimen is found in the Chatham Islands that is greater than 16 millimeters in length, it is likely to be Pitt Island longhorn. Recently dead or dying branches attract adult beetles. As it is flightless and will spend time moving on the ground between trees, it is vulnerable to rodent predation. Knowing its exact habitat requirements as an adult and at the larval stage is thought to be a conservation priority. This species has not been seen at its type locality of Pitt Island since 1907, despite extensive surveys for it since 1990. After 1910, it was not seen again until 1987. The latter and all subsequent specimens have been collected on Rangatira, an island that lies off the southeast coast of Pitt Island. This species is the only longhorn beetle that is legally protected under Schedule 7 of the 1953 Wildlife Act, making it an offence to kill, possess, buy, or sell a specimen. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel get around those YouTube algorithms. Also consider subscribing so as not to miss any future uploads. This helps to support me and any work I put into these videos. If you're feeling ultra generous, you can also support me by subscribing to my Patreon for as little as $3, which covers everything I do creatively. I'm also a songwriter and a web designer, so there are a few tutorials and such. In the meantime, stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you on my next video.